Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And for today's show, a roundtable that we recorded earlier this week on Jean-Claude of Beyond Mystic, which is a YouTube channel. Great channel. He's a big silver fan, and he invited Bix Weir, myself, and Sean from SGT Report to talk about silver, take some questions about silver, and he kindly allowed us to repost that here, so we have something to watch today. But do check out his channel. It's a great one that I enjoy quite a bit. And with that said, here is today's Silver Roundtable.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude at Beyond Mystic, and welcome to this third episode of Silver Roundtable, our very special series. And today, of course, we have three guests. There's one missing, but he's on the road, and he'll be here within a minute or two, I guess. Let's start with our first one, a new guest to the show today. I'm so excited to have him on. I've been watching him for almost 10 years now. Sean at SGT Report. Sean, how are you today?
Hey, I'm very well, man. Thanks so much for having me on.
Dude, I'm so excited. I'm like a kid in a candy store. What are you talking about? Oh, man. Sean, okay, I'll get back to you just in a sec, Sean. So please welcome my guest, also Bix Weir from roadtoroot.com. Bix, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be on Sean. He was the first YouTube guy I ever interviewed with.
Oh, is that true? Was that the DTCC episode?
No, it was long before that.
Yeah,
before that.
Three-parter.
Probably in 2000 and what, Bix, 11?
I think it's 10 or 11, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. How time flies, eh, guys? And man, thank you so much, everyone, for being on the show live with us today. We're going to get into basically our love affair for silver. Of course, this is the Silver Roundtable. We're going to talk about what's happening at the COMEX since March, the new changes in delivery, and especially what led up to the last couple of weeks here in August. Bix has been doing a lot of research on that, so we'll get his thoughts on that, and maybe get into what we think is going into September and October, and maybe this October surprise, and eventually the election. So we're going to have a great roundtable today, guys. And I wanted to start with Sean and thank him officially on the record for all the work that he's been doing in waking up and trying to wake up people on YouTube all over the years, and just being that constant light of practical information, sound information, great research. I mean, Sean, the production value of your stuff has always been astounding to me, that you can do all of this stuff basically on your own, without the big production crew that CNN has with the blank check from the globalists. So thank you so much, Sean, again, for everything you've done for everyone. And I know you were a big part for me waking up, and for Sarah, who you just said hello to before the show here. So again, on the record, thank you so much for everything you do, Sean.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that's so nice of you to say, Jean-Claude. And I mean, it's a labor of love. It always has been. And, if anything, being self-deprecating as I tend to be, I wish I could be funnier. I wish I could be a little bit more like Owen Benjamin and, share hard truths with a smile on my face. But, I tend to get pretty righteously outraged about this stuff. And I think that cuts through. I'm honest the way I do it, but, I'm rarely funny. And I think if there's one debit I'd give myself is I wish I could approach this stuff with just a little bit more humor, because sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying. Right, Bix?
Yeah, I mean, hey, I've been following your show forever, and the dramatic works for what you deal with. It's even more dramatic than you present it, and you present it pretty dramatically. But I mean, the content is so heavy and so deep, and we all absolutely need to know it all. And I still don't know how you're still on YouTube, which is wonderful. I mean, I know you get demonetized 99% of the time, but it's wonderful that you're still running through the gauntlet of censorship on YouTube.
Yeah, totally demonetized now. About a month and a half ago, they said you no longer qualify for our YouTube partnership program. After a review of your channel, we found that your content is harmful to viewers. And I thought, okay, wait a minute. I've been a YouTube partner in good standing for 10 years. And now my content is harmful to viewers? Which viewers? Because I get 98% likes on all my videos. So not my viewers, right? I think it's the globalist viewers. It's the George Soros people. It's the Democrats. But they're not watching my stuff. I mean, that's just the joke that YouTube is and their double standard. It's so enraging. So
yeah, and you just got a community strike last week for impersonation, and quite a few other people. Jason at 4 had the same strike, I think, a week before you. So
what is that impersonation? I had an interview with Spiro Skouras Of course, it was about COVID and all of that, so they don't like that content. But honestly, I appealed it, and for the first time ever, I won the appeal. So they took away the strike after 3 days, and then they age restricted that video. So I don't know how to please these people. You can't, and if you're going to make videos trying to please YouTube, you're going to have a crappy channel. I mean, you got to speak from your heart, no matter what it is, no matter what your angle is. But as it pertains to, my lack of humor in this stuff, it gets pretty hard to talk about child sex trafficking and pedophilia, and joke about it. There's no laughter to be had on some of these subjects, right? It's the troubling part about this world in which we live.
Yeah. And absolutely, I want to echo what we were saying earlier too. Like, I started watching probably 2010, 2011, and you led me to a lot of the people that woke me up in terms of silver. You led me to David Morgan, to Bix Weir, to what's the guy's name? The younger guy who does the silver rounds, Chris Duane, and all these guys, and Mike Maloney and all that. So again, this has been such a hard, long road for us people who woke up that early, got into silver. And of course, Bix has been into silver for 20 years. He's had it even worse than we have. And now here we are coming full circle, and the whole world seems to be changing around our feet here. So Sean, I'd like you to get maybe into how you got into silver, where your love affair started with all of this, and how it was always a big part of your show in terms of waking up people to the financial world. I'll give you carte blanche here to set up for, I don't think I have viewers who don't know you, but in case I do, let's set up a little bit here, how you got started and how silver was kind of constant throughout your career here.
Man, that is a funny question. It's hard to remember when I bought my first silver coins. And it's interesting because I know I was buying silver when I first interviewed Bix, very interested in talking to him about the suppressions of the metals, the GATA investigation of the manipulation via the COMEX. So I don't know that I can pinpoint a date. I think it probably goes back to about 2007. I was still working for Target Corporation at that point as a creative director, making commercials and stuff. And talking a little bit too much truth in the workplace got me in trouble after being, promoted multiple times there for a decade. But turns out human resources doesn't appreciate too many conversations about World Trade Center 7 collapsing at free fall speed. And so, it's interesting, though, because Bix and I and Chris, who have not met, looks like he just joined the call. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Sean. Pleasure to be on here with you today. Big fan of your show.
Oh, I post some of your stuff over at my little site, thephaser.com. And
thank you.
By the way, have you guys noticed in your YouTube feeds that it's getting harder and harder to find stuff you want to watch? Like, I don't know what they're doing to my feed. And I think the most value my little site, thephaser.com, has is that I hand select interesting videos from interesting producers that people may not otherwise find, right? Because YouTube changed their algorithms. But now that's starting to affect my feed to the point where I'm not getting served up the interesting stuff anymore, even though I'm subscribed to hundreds of channels that most people aren't. It's super frustrating. But I know Bix has been at the precious metals game longer than me, because if I bought my first metals around 2006 or 7, Bix has probably been at it. What, Bix? 2001? When did you first buy silver?
20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just remember when Bix and I had our conversation, I was so naive to think, right? Okay, here's the thing. One of my big awakening moments, one of my aha moments was like, oh my God, I am at the beginning of something gigantic, is when CPM Group's Jeff Christian said, quote, "Precious metals are financial assets, and like currencies and T-bills and T-bonds, they trade in the multiples of 100 times the underlying physical." I'm like, ding, 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 ding. Oh my God, this thing's going to $1,000 tomorrow. Yeah. That's not what happened, because of COMEX, because of JP Morgan, because of Deutsche Bank, because of manipulation, because of Scotiabank. And so here we sit all of these years later with silver at 27. Seriously?
Yeah.
I can continue, but I don't want to hog all the time.
Well, let's take this moment to welcome Chris from Arcadia Economics. Of course, he's the author of The Big Silver Short. Chris, welcome aboard. Thank you for being on. I know you're on the road today, and you called me just before the show, let us know that you were going to be a little bit late, so I kept your seat warm. Thank you for being on, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks again for having me, Jean-Claude, Sean, Bix. Great to see you guys as well. And Yeah, to what Sean was just saying, I mean, I think that's someone I was talking with about it this morning. I don't think it's that the economics or the numbers are really that challenging, but I often think of it as the greatest hypnotic thought experiment in history. And can you stand up and say, wow, this emperor is really darn naked? I also understand it's kind of understandably hard for most people to accept that basically every institution or base of power that we've been taught to trust, turns out not only aren't they, I mean, it'd be one thing if they were just incompetent and did nothing, but so many of these groups really taking advantage of people, which is unfortunate. But again, that's why it's, nice that there are folks out there that do speak up about what they're seeing.
Yeah, very good. Bix, why don't we start with you here a little bit? In our last show, you described quite in detail with Craig Hemke about the comics changes in terms of transforming it into a delivery mechanism after the EFPs were kind of breaking behind the scenes in March, and how that led up to a huge demand standing for delivery in August. So can you kind of navigate through that and tell the folks here, as you can see, doing your research for the last couple of days of trading in August, what happened to all of these shorts and the people who were standing for delivery, and where do you think this is leading us into for September?
Well, I'd say a few things on that. I know a lot of people say, yeah, the comics has turned into a delivery mechanism type of exchange. I don't see that at all. As a matter of fact, comics is for silver, the real delivery mechanism has always been there. JP Morgan has pulled off 1 billion ounces since 2011. So yes, it's becoming more public what's happening, but Ted Butler's been documenting this for a hell of a long time. We are getting near the end point. That's the end point of manipulation, is when basically the comics it's going to shut down. There's no reason to have the comics. Futures and options are fun financial instruments to play with. The mining companies don't use them anymore. Now the coin dealers will use them, but how many contracts do they really need to hedge their book? Because they got metal coming in, coming out. They're not going to open up a new position every time something comes in and every time something goes out. Who the hell needs the comics, truthfully? Because the volumes are so off the charts. 1 billion ounces a day trading on the comics when no mining companies are hedging their production these days. I mean, the only thing comics is needed for is to manipulate the price. Now, let's talk about the delivery mechanism part of it. Yes, they're pulling out more silver out of the comics, but it's going right into SLV, which is another banker-controlled inventory. But that SLV, even though JP Morgan is the custodian of SLV, I don't think JP Morgan owns all that silver in SLV, or even thinks they own it. I think the idea is to get the bankers out of the comics so that there can be a legitimate exchange with no JP Morgan, no Scotiabank, no Citibank trading on their house accounts. And that's what we've seen go on in the past through the summer, and this coming into this September delivery, is the closing out of, shall we say, uneconomic short positions. Mm-hmm. They're closing these out at a loss, which they never did ever before. And I believe Ted Butler was correct when he said that the DOJ has made a deal with the manipulators to say you have till either the end of September or the end of December to get out of your position and out of that market altogether. And I kind of see that happening. We had huge positions closed out last week, right before the end of the trading month for August, which would mean everything that held over had to be delivered in September. So yes, they are delivering, but it's not going to be the future of delivery. There's just not enough silver out there. So this might be, yes, it might have been a new place to source physical silver, but at the end of the day, how long can this go on? I think September is going to be the last time you see any decent sized deliveries. And it's still not even, I think it's like 60% of what was delivered in July. So basically, I think they're running out of physical silver for the comics to be a delivery mechanism.
Very good. Sean, you spoke earlier about, some of the work that you do, and it's not always easy to put a smile or to laugh or to be funny when you're talking about some of these grave subjects. And on my show, we do speak a lot about the fact that the financial system is one part and parcel a system of control for this planet, and it also runs kind of interference for all the other things that you're talking about, whether that's the child trafficking and the enslavement of humans and all that. Where do you see, as you follow these rabbit holes, where do you see the system going now? Because we appear to be in a transition of our financial system, and how does that affect, you think, the overall matrix of control that has been, like I said, running cover for a lot of these other nefarious things on the planet? What are your insiders or the people that you have on your show telling you sometimes off air that either give you pause for concern or encourage you in terms of where we're going?
That is such a huge question, because, any of us could, just pontificate about that for the next half hour. I think that, where is the system going? I think the system, quote unquote, the system of control, when you think of these, for instance, the 13 families of the Illuminati and these bloodlines, if that's really the control system, add in the Vatican. I think that they have overreached. I think that the internet has woken so many people up. The conversation we're having could not have been had 20 years ago. People weren't talking about this stuff. Then 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, I was amazed that the mainstream media was ignoring the collapse of World Trade Center 7 at 5:25 in the afternoon on that day. And they ignored the fact that Jane Stanley reported live from New York City at 5:15 in the afternoon about the collapse of the Salomon Brothers building. Details are sketchy, she said, as the building was standing behind her, but the Salomon Brothers building has collapsed. That's World Trade Center 7. The satellite signal fails, and 10 minutes later, the building collapses. So, I'm telling my friends about this at Target, saying, hey, there's more going on here than we're being told. And I was met with responses like, oh, that's probably green screen. How do you know that's real? Blah, 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 blah. If that was real, young, hungry reporters would be, this would be the biggest story in human history. They'd be reporting on it, but nobody did. Now what do we see? We see the mainstream media running cover for the deep state, CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post, which is now owned by Jeff Bezos, Bezos blog, New York Times. So now it's never been more obvious that there is a shadow government, there is a deep state apparatus, and the mainstream media runs cover for it. So the fact that people are waking up in droves and having these conversations about the Federal Reserve, about the manipulation of precious metals, about the dangers of vaccines, about all of these topics, I think that the establishment has overreached. I think they're a bit in a panic. And now what do we see? We see them rolling out this Rockefeller lockstep program on the back of a COVID lie. So now we're seeing them act overtly tyrannical. Look what they're doing in Australia. In New Zealand, they're saying if you test positive for COVID, you're going to be ushered off to a quarantine camp. And then we see people revolting in Germany. All over the world, people are showing up and demonstrating against these lockdown policies. That's the good news. So to answer your question, and I don't know if I have very adequately, I just think that the control mechanism of this planet, the controllers, are now acting more tyrannically than we've ever seen, and the mainstream media ignores it and pretends it's not happening. And I think that's waking up more people.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a meme the other day. I saw if CNN was around in World War II, they would have said that Pearl Harbor was a mostly peaceful protest. And I thought that was funny because, of course, we see all these crazy things happening around us, yet we have the mainstream media gaslighting us and telling us, no, look over here, everything's fine. And so I hear your point on that. Sean, what I've also appreciated from you over the last 10 years now of watching your show is that you've always understood, and you were one of the bright lights out there speaking to the fact that we were in fact in a spiritual war. And for quite many years, people didn't really understand that point. And I think now today, as you're saying, we're reaching this tipping point, and we're starting to understand that there's more at stake here than just the financial system or the COMEX and the rule of law. There's way, way, way more involved here. Can you speak about that a little bit and share with us your understanding of this war that we're in and where you see it going? What's the tipping point that we're on now, and maybe share with folks your personal feelings on where we're going in the next couple of months.
Well, look, I've just been saying that this is the Democrats, BLM and Antifa represent an existential threat to our very republic. All right. So if we want a nation of laws, if we want a nation that has a constitution and a Bill of Rights moving forward, then the choice is very clear. People have to walk away from the Democratic Party because they are controlled by Marxists. BLM, the two founders of BLM, are avowed Marxists, trained Marxists. They brag about themselves. Antifa is now shooting Trump supporters in the streets of Portland, murdering them. And then the crowds are cheering, saying, we took out the trash. Okay. Even Ted Wheeler, we talked about this before we hit record, before we went live. Ted Wheeler, the Democrat mayor of Portland, is now saying he needs to move because the crowds are the mob, not crowds, it's a mob. The mob is turning on him. Lori Lightfoot, same thing. She wants to lock down her block so she's safe in Chicago. Meanwhile, she's pledged her allegiance to a new world order twice on video, in her words, right? In her own words. She has pledged an allegiance to a new world order and global governance. Well, what is that? That's Rockefeller, that's Rothschild, that's lockstep. So I'm outraged because all of this is so plain to see for me, for you, for Bix, for Chris. We can see it. I'm shocked that I still have neighbors. I have a Democrat neighbor. I've known this woman for 20 years. Sweet lady. Her name's Shannon. She came across the street after this George Floyd thing, not to my house, but to my neighbor Dave's house, and asked him if he wanted to go march in a BLM protest in downtown Minneapolis. He's like, no, thank you. I don't. So she's drunk the Kool-Aid. She's going to be voting for Biden. And I don't see how that's possible. She's an educated 60-year-old woman. How is that possible? I don't understand. So I do believe that some people are not capable of waking up. Others are. You know what? I'll ask you guys, what makes us so, and the people listening, what makes us different? How are we wired to be able to wake up? How are we wired to be intellectually curious, to see that there was a problem on 9/11 and dig deeper? How are we wired to see that there was a problem with comics manipulation, so we dug deeper? How are we wired to figure out what this Federal Reserve System is when most of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues have no idea it's privately owned? How are we just different? Is it in our DNA? I don't get it, how some people are intellectually curious and others are going to stay plugged into this matrix forever.
Chris, do you want to tackle that? Do you want to?
Sure. It's a great question. Again, like I mentioned a little earlier, I mean, I also accept there's a time before I got it, so I try to be as patient as possible. Some days is a little easier than others when I'm seeing more people wearing masks outside and in their cars. And I think there is something corona, but I mean, it's hard to imagine that we're being given the straight story. I mean, if corona was what we were told in the beginning, I mean, so again, I think it's hard for people to imagine that their trust has been this abused. Jean-Claude, you mentioned Pearl Harbor. That's an interesting one because what I'm guessing most folks don't know is that that wasn't just this random attack that we were told in our Rothschild's history books. There's this great scholar, Judge John Denson, does these incredible podcasts on the Lou Rockwell show. So, and I'd bet on this man's version of history over what we were sold. He goes, reads history books and presents the real way things went down. And in Pearl Harbor, the U.S., according to Judge Denson, the U.S. had no interest in going to war, so there had to be something orchestrated to get the Japanese attack so we could hit them back first. And folks can look up General McCullum's memo. It's either an 8 or 9 point plan of how to get the Japanese to push them until they were provoked into an attack. Similar with the sinking of the Lusitania prior to World War I, Gulf of Tonkin. And then you mentioned September 11th, which interestingly enough, I was there that day in downtown New York. My misguided youth, I was working for Moody's. Yes, the same bond rating agency that puts a AAA rating on U.S. corporate debt, essentially saying to investors that it's simply impossible to have a better credit profile than the U.S. government. Largest, most indebted organization in the history of finance or the globe, probably other planets as well if they have financial markets. I don't know if anyone could be more reckless, irresponsible, and Ponzi scheme-ish than what the government is doing. And anyway, that was Moody's, my first job, and it was downtown. And I guess the two memories of that day were that I was standing there when the second building was hit. And I remember the sound was always weird because there's this sound when cars collide that sounds like a collision. I remember it sounded like a bang or a pop. It actually did. I think it was actually in a Judge Denson interview where apparently the towers were closed for about 36 hours prior to that. And someone was saying that there's plenty of evidence they were putting explosives there. Then it's like, so, but how are people supposed to react when, you find out the senior Bush was having business meetings with the bin Laden family that morning, that NORAD was doing tests of what would happen if a plane flew into a building for months up until that morning. They don't mention that. Sean mentioned Building 7 that fell over. I've heard that there's a Building 6 that just the wind blew over as well. And then when you just start adding the pieces together, I'm guessing most people aren't aware that I believe it was Marvin Bush just been awarded a $50 million contract for security of the trade centers. People find that hard to believe, but keep in mind when the Panama invasion, I believe 1989, when I guess they decided General Noriega, they didn't need him to run cocaine for the Clintons and Bushes anymore. They cut him loose, slaughtered 4,000 people there. So the idea that this government wouldn't do these things, we found out later, not only weren't there weapons of mass destruction, they knew darn well they weren't there. So, I mean, it's a lot of these same families. It goes back quite a while. I get it if people hear this for the first time and think this is just conspiracy theory. I mean, I'm stunned by the stuff I come across. But again, I find what's helpful is, each person's ready to handle whatever they're ready to handle. And, again, just putting in the right context where, hey, I mean, these are the guys that said the weapons of mass destruction. Turns out they lied. And that's the same families that are controlling this stuff now. It's certainly unfortunate, although maybe just one last takeaway is that I know a lot of people worry, and I've been there, without the dollar, we're all going to be shooting each other in the streets. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening right now. And when you think about the nefarious stuff this dollar supports, I mean, if we were using pet rocks as the currency right now, we'd probably be better off, let alone some combination of cryptos and metals. So I wonder how much of that is more government engineered fear, which is really the only thing that they can produce. And I would suggest, and Jean-Claude, you play a valuable role in this with the metaphysics where, I don't know, I've known about silver for a while and I've had my financial adventures, although I find the more that, you believe things are possible, even during the Great Depression, the people who understood what was happening, some did really well financially. So I would suggest that the more you understand and take your own sovereign power back, that good things are possible to come out of this.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And of course, this is what this show is all about. It's all about, self-mastery and learning from each other and getting into this community. And we, of course, support and appreciate everyone here in the Truth Circle and trying to decipher, first of all, what is the truth, and second, to be able to disseminate it. Bix, I want to give you the opportunity here to answer Sean's question. Are we wired differently? What is it for you? And maybe segue into the work you're doing now with the psychics in terms of the psychic metals and what the new understandings you're getting around precious metals now and what it means for you. But let's start with that. Are you wired differently? What got you going on all of this?
I think we have an interest in finding the truth, but we all know how to follow breadcrumbs on the internet. I think we'll get a sniff of something, and we discern that doesn't sound right, or what is it about that? We'll start doing a couple searches and find something else, and all of a sudden you're digging in places that creates kind of a more full picture, a more true picture than what they're presenting to us in the mainstream media. We all know it's corrupt and it's owned by a handful of people who are trying to steer our lives. Actually, I don't think we all know that. And that was one of my first things that I learned, is that, oh my God, I remember the moment that I found out, oh my God, the bankers are controlling the stock market. What? And then I found out the media is under their control, also the financial media.
Mm-hmm.
CNBC's lying to me. What? And all of that just opened a floodgate for me back in the 90s, when I think I figured it out from the chat rooms on Yahoo Finance back in the 90s, when the chat rooms were just starting. I mean, literally, people need to remember, before 1990, there was no World Wide Web. If you wanted information, it had to be published in a book or in a newspaper, and you had to go to the library or track down an old newspaper at the library. Information was very difficult to come by, and it was very hard to put the breadcrumbs together. Today, with the internet, you can do it instantly. I mean, you have so much information at your fingertips to put these things together. But that's what I think we're wired to do. We're wired to put together facts that lead to a more true narrative, and then question all the people who are saying, no, the stock market's not rigged. What are you talking about? The bankers aren't, controlling the price. What are you talking about? And then that gets you digging deeper into how the bankers control the price. I mean, for me, that was the big thing when I found out gold and silver were rigged. I'm like, well, how are they doing it? Yeah, I can see the results are the swings in prices at the wrong time and playing with the derivatives, but how? Who's doing it? How are they doing it? And that led down the path to computers invented by Alan Greenspan in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, and the rabbit hole just keeps going and going. And you got to have a curiosity about, if your mind thinks the story is not full, the story is not the complete story, I'm being either lied to or they're just not filling out the rest of the story. That's where I jump, my mind jumps in and says, okay, let's get the full story and then we'll figure out what the truth is. So that's the way I've been looking at it.
Very good. And the second part of my question was, what's happening with you in the last couple of weeks working with some of these psychics, learning about the different properties of gold and silver and all the dreams you've been having? And I'm laughing because, of course, this is more in my wheelhouse than yours, maybe. But I wanted the folks maybe hear it from you. I know you're doing a lot of this work on your road to Ruta and then on the private road with some of these psychics. But what can you share with folks here a little bit in terms of your new awakenings there?
Well, definitely, and as Sean was saying, this is a spiritual war as well. So the tools are very similar to what we have on planet Earth. We have gold and silver being suppressed for various reasons, and it's not all financial. There are spiritual reasons. There are karmic reasons. There's all kinds of reasons. There's an overall arching, is silver the destroyer of the banksters? Well, on a level of, my God, they're rigging the price, they have a gigantic short position. It is the destroyer of bankers, because the higher the price goes, the more money the banks lose. And they have to put on that short position to control the price, because you can't run an unbacked fiat monetary system without controlling the price. In the same breath, there is a spiritual aspect of this that I've been tapping into lately, and especially with gold and silver, but silver being the destroyer on the physical world, it's also the destroyer on a metaphysical world, on a spiritual world. I've been in contact with some strange entities, knights on silver horses coming in to smash the banksters, and it's coming through all of us. It's the way I see it as a combination of all these people who are awakening on planet Earth to the silver manipulation. And it's a gigantic wave of investors and advocates, people screaming about JP Morgan rigging the silver market, but they're all learning and they're coming in with the spiritual side right now. this cavalry of spiritual knights on these big silver horses are coming in. And, you can believe that stuff or you can't, or you just can't get your head around it, but I can feel it. And you can feel it that something's different. Something has changed on the ground and spiritually. And then also I got into gold and going down that rabbit hole, holy moly. I mean, even on the physical side, how does gold arrive on planet Earth? And I'm going, oh, wow, I have gone down some rabbit holes like you would not believe. And it's all coming from the sun. And, historically, you go back in these old religions and there's the sun gods are all the most powerful ones. And they're all associated with gold, whereas the moon is associated with silver. Well, gold is actually created in the middle of the sun. There's 2.4 trillion tons of gold within the sun. And the sun is always spewing out the solar wind, which has particles of gold everywhere. And then you have these filaments that get spit out that can be like miles long of gold filaments into the atmosphere. It is crazy, the research you find. It's always been out there. I mean, I'm reading books from back in the 1940s where they're talking about this stuff and before. But it's strange how history gets hidden from us. All our history has been hidden from us. And that has to do with, I mean, that was like, 80 years ago, these books were written explaining how all this works. And now we're not even taught any of it. It's crazy. So yes, I am knee deep in that path. I've figured out a huge revelation this weekend, which I'll talk about on the private road at roadtorudo.com. But it has to do with my, my patron saint, shall we say, who I have now met.
Oh, interesting.
And he's pretty damn famous, this one. So I'm having conversations and it's, for me, it's the best patron saint of all the saints. And I'm not really Catholic or I'm not really religious, truthfully. I believe in, the spirituality side of it, and there's good and bad parts of all religions in my book. But the whole patron saint thing was new to me, and now we're buds, and I mean, I'm being steered in places that I didn't even think about looking for the kind of the revelations behind gold and silver, and it's amazing. I'm being blown away these days, every day.
Wow. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Bix. Let me just see, I have an echo here. Folks on YouTube, thank you so much for being in the live chat. I'm going to ask you now, if you have questions for these fabulous gentlemen, please type them in now and put them in high caps so I can pull them out of the chat easier. And of course, we don't always have the opportunity to ask Sean at SGT personal questions, not necessarily too personal, but just questions to Sean at SGT. I think this is a fabulous opportunity for you guys to do so. So if you do have questions for him, please put them in the chat as well. Sean, back to you. As you have this amazing bird's eye view with all of this ton of research you've done over the last 10 years or more now into this system, and we're on this precipice now of this financial reset, or actually probably in it already. Someone might argue we're already very close to the end point here. We're coming to a head, as they say, and as we've awakened to all of this over the last couple of years, we've had this fight between the precious metals folks and the crypto folks. And I wanted to ask you where you think this is landing right now, because of course, I've heard you interview Chris Drain before, who said, oh, the crypto is just your dirty little girlfriend, but we'll eventually come back to precious metals at one point. What are your thoughts on all of this now as we're transitioning, and where are we going with crypto and precious metals? What do you have to share?
Well, I wanted to ask Chris a question and Bix about 9/11. So we'll go back to that in a second. So don't let me forget, because when Chris was talking and he mentioned working for Moody's, it triggered a thought.
I was young and needed the money.
Yeah. Well, it's funny how we all bring a different, set of tools to this thing. I mean, we all bring, different experiences that shape who we are. But as it pertains to cryptos, I could have been one of the early adopters. Bix, maybe you got some crypto before I did. So I would just say this about cryptos, because I was such a ardent silver bull, a sound money guy. I was sort of in the Peter Schiff camp for a while regarding cryptos, but I did have an open mind enough that I would interview Brother John, for instance, because he was very much an early adopter Bitcoin guy. And I do remember this. I think it was must have been around 2013. I bought a Triumph Thruxton motorcycle, And I remember thinking I should probably throw that money at Bitcoin. Had I done that, I would have a lot more money than a devaluing motorcycle. But that said, I did come sort of full circle in when Bitcoin, remember when it first hit 2,000 Bix? I think that was its all-time high, and then it retraced down to what? I don't know, a couple hundred, 300? I bought my first Bitcoin at around 400, 450. And I advised people who listened to me to maybe do the same. I said, look, it doesn't hurt to dip a foot in the pool, because I'm here to tell you, I've lived through so many stock market cycles, crashes, and recoveries that I really think that this thing will hit its all-time high of 2,000 again. And wouldn't you rather have a piece than sit on the sidelines and wish you had a piece? So that was sort of my advice, and it was really no more detailed than that. And then Bitcoin went to 19,000. So, I mean, I'm open-minded on the cryptos. I own some Litecoin and some Bitcoin and some Ethereum and some EOS and a couple of other things. Yeah, I know you're not an EOS guy. I know the child pedophile guy. Is that Vix and I've talked about this. I know he's a big Theta guy. I don't know Jack Diddley about Theta. But if I could circle back to 9/11, I thought it was so interesting when I heard Max Kaiser talk about, see, because this is all spiritual warfare. Bix is absolutely right. And the spiritual warfare that has been in the unseen realm for our lifetimes, but is very real, is now being manifested in the physical by these BLM Antifa rioters who are now literally burning Bibles. They hate Jesus Christ. They embrace anarchy. They're saying death to America. I mean, I've said many times that these people are beholden. They are in the grip of the Antichrist spirit, right? And I think it's very sad. We can pray for those people. I wish they'd wake up. They have no idea whose agenda they serve. They really don't. They're serving the Marxist communist banker agenda, right? We've seen this play out throughout history. So these people are being used, and I don't know why so many of them are so willing to do what they're doing. But it is spiritual warfare, and I think 9/11 was a ritual. What happened on 9/11 was very much a ritual by the powerful that pulled it off. And I thought at the time, boy, if I'm right about this, and I am now, right? We know the work of AE 9/11 Truth, Richard Gage, and so many other people, the scientists, it's concrete. We know that what happened on 9/11 is very different than the official story. And it was a ritual, right? And very evil people pulled this off. And I remember Max Kaiser, when he first came on my radar, I saw him giving an interview in Europe on one of these, might have been France 24, I forget, but he talked about bond fraud on 9/11. And this number doesn't sound very big now, but I think it was $100 billion in bonds were supposed to come due on the 12th of September. And on 9/11, they all mysteriously, all of that stuff just blew up. And along with those bonds and the evidence and all that paper trail, 658 people at Cantor Fitzgerald, the biggest bond trading firm at the time, I think, one of two anyway, they all died. And the only person that survived was the CEO, Howard Lutnick. And I thought, man, there's so much more to this story than meets the eye. Bix or Chris, do you guys know anything about that bond fraud?
Yeah.
Is that the Black Eagle Trust, I believe?
Yeah.
Well, tell people, because it's such an interesting part of the story.
It is. But there's so much more than it too. I mean, Building 7 held the investigations into the GATA, the gold and silver manipulation, and along with the O&I at the Pentagon, where the supposed plane crashed and evaporated upon impact. The whole thing, and the gold and silver vaults, COMEX vaults below the Twin Towers, and they were empty. Or, well, there's a lot of silver left because they didn't get the silver out. But there was big, what do they call them? The trucks that pull all the massive wealth out. What do they call those? They go with the money and round to bank, those cars.
The Brinks trucks.
Yes. There were Brinks trucks that were half full. They were in the process of removing all the gold and silver, and then they didn't get it out in time, not knowing, oh shit, this stuff is heavy. So there's tunnels all throughout New York City underground, going to the Fed, going to 55 Water Street. I mean, when you go down these paths, And I do remember on 9/11, I knew where I was. I remember first seeing a short documentary called Loose Change, which changed over the years. But the first iteration, I'm like, holy shit, what has happened and why have they done it? And then the Patriot Act was like thousands of pages long. And all of a sudden, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later, they vote on it in Congress. It had already been written long before what happened on 9/11, but that was the impetus. That was the one thing that they could say, this is why you have to read it, and you can't read it. You can't read it, and you have to sign it, Congress. And because they're all, standing on the steps, holding their heart, singing God Bless America, they just signed away our freedoms, no problem. I mean, it is, when you stand back, it's obvious, but when you're in the middle of the fight, it's chaotic. And it's like every time one of these false flags comes up, you just sit there and you go, okay, I'm going to give it a day or two to figure out what's going on. And then guys like Sean are running around finding the right information to put the pieces together. And then you either find out it's a real event or a false flag event. So yes, Sean, you're absolutely right. 9/11. And if you look at the Road to Ruta documents, what does Ruta write in the sand? 9/11, 11 plus 9. And yeah, I mean, that's basically, that came out January 1st, 2007. And then September 11th, 2008 was the moment that they tried to destroy the monetary system by pulling out $500 billion from money markets. So yes, 9/11 is coming up. We're 2 weeks away or a week and a half away. I do expect something to happen, but I'm not so sure we'll see it. It's like last 9/11, the repo market blew up, but we didn't see it till a couple of days. I think this time something will happen and we won't see it for a couple of days.
Sean, what do you think is happening right now? There's a question on the screen for you. Do you think we're being held in status with all of this fakery and fuckery around? And do you think that we're going to have big, massive changes come November and December?
I saw that question and I didn't really know what it meant. Maybe that's a reference to deep state arrests in queue. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, where are all of these arrests that we all want to see? I guess I'm not really sure. What is your interpretation of that question? I don't really.
Either way you want to pick at it, I mean, it feels like this COVID thing, and I've had other viewers or other guests on my show say that it was kind of cover to maybe slow down the whole financial system to almost a halt. Just like if we were going to do a heart transplant, you'd have to put the patient in a coma first so that he wouldn't bleed out as you remove the core central parts here. Is that what's happening? And if so, like that could be one interpretation. And the second one, do you expect, Sean, that we're going to have huge fireworks come the election, regardless of who wins? So maybe talk about that and share with folks what your guests are talking about.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball. I mean, my gut feeling is that the current president will be the president after the election as well. He'll get reelected because it's impossible for me to understand how Sleepy Joe, Creepy Joe Biden could be the front runner. It's literally impossible. I mean, literally, and I'm trying to be objective here, but I mean, he finally emerged from his basement yesterday or 2 days ago, and he got out of his armored car or whatever the heck he was in, carrying 4 pizzas, and he was bringing these pizzas to some business owner, and he had his mask on, and there was no crowds and no excitement, but one heckler. There was a heckler off camera saying, "Joe, you came out of your basement. Joe, it's good to see you, Joe." And then he started heckling Joe about going after fracking. "You're going to target fracking now, Joe. You're a liar, Joe." And I'm thinking, this guy's the front runner? You know, he does a presser and he gets maybe 140 people to turn out. I mean, look at all of the excitement and energy around Trump. I mean, actual grassroots excitement, people that show up carrying flags and these boat parades and massive crowds. I mean, it's impossible. Again, though, we know the mainstream media has been weaponized, completely 100% weaponized. So they are going to parrot the official narratives. If you want to know what the deep state is up to, if you want to know what the shadow government plan is, watch CNN for half a day. And they'll lay it out for you. They'll tell you who they want to win the election. They'll lie to you with fake polls and say Joe Biden is the front runner when the guy can't string a sentence together and he's up to his neck in corruption with what went on in Ukraine with his son, Hunter. So, I mean, I don't know, man. I think the election, and I know a lot of people think it doesn't matter, right? Voting doesn't change a thing. Both sides are controlled by puppet masters above them. I get it. But I feel that President Trump is the most maligned, persecuted president in the history of Washington, D.C., because he does, at least to some degree, stand opposed to these globalist plans, right? The George Soros plans. I guess if I have one issue, I would say, why has George Soros not been indicted or arrested yet? You know, how come James Comey is still walking free, right? Where are all of the arrests? That's what I'm waiting for. We've all been waiting just a bit too long for that.
Yeah. While I still have you on the line here, Sean, I'll ask you this other question here from John. He's saying, well, what about Jacera and Nasera, maybe the debt Jubilee stuff? Is that a psyop? Do you think there's any truth to that? Are we leading up to that? What's your gut feeling, John?
Well, I would turn that over to Chris and Bix for their opinion, because I'm familiar with Nasera, and I think it's a brilliant idea that was hatched, I think, in the late 90s, mid 90s. It's been around forever. I personally don't know what the plan is. The president, look, I did a video called The Curious Case for 936-ounce silver in 2011. Then the national debt was 14 trillion. Today, the national debt is 26.712 trillion. So it's almost twice as much, right? The national debt. Then gold was $1,275 an ounce. Okay, take the manipulation out of the picture. Shouldn't gold be $2,500 an ounce based on the doubling of the national debt since then, at the very least? Look, I don't know. Bix and I have talked about this a lot. I'm very skeptical that the gold they claim is in Fort Knox is actually there. And if it is there, it's all been farmed out, leased out, hypothecated and rehypothecated. And I don't think, well, I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know what's coming. I just know that people with physical silver and gold are going to be way better off than those who don't have it.
May I touch on a few things you mentioned there?
Go ahead, man.
First, with the Fort Knox, I actually did drive by there. I think it was 2016. I was driving across the country, and I thought there'd be like a tour you could take. I mean, the New York Federal Reserve, there's actually a tour, which I lived in that area for 32 years and didn't go. I'm ashamed of myself, although I'm heading east in about a month. So Bix, if you want to fly over, and Sean and Jean-Claude, if anyone wants to take the Fed tour, welcome to join me. I thought there was a tour of Fort Knox, so I'm driving. I don't see anything, and I end up at the Fort Knox Army Barracks. The guy's looking, he's like, what are you doing here? And so I'm saying I was looking for the vault. He sent me.
I came to see the gold.
Yeah, so, but it's weird the way it's set up, because it's kind of like on a highway. You can't, then there's this curved road, so you can't stop. There wasn't like, you couldn't pull over there. But I'm looking at this thing, and again, I don't know what it's supposed to look like, but there was nobody out there. There was maybe one car parked, and I don't know. I mean, I know there's those towers where I guess there's guards inside. I couldn't see that part. I was driving, but it just seems surreal. Like, this is the nation's wealth. There's not like a guard marching around, or, you know, Russia, they have the guys with the hats defending the gems. But I mean, it just looked abandoned. And certainly, Bix, I know you do stuff with Miles Franklin. I talked with Andy last week when I had him on, just the idea that any business where, if you're legitimately storing the gold, your audit, that's a sales point. I mean, if I'm really storing this stuff in there as advertised, then yeah, I know it might have been Miles Franklin, or maybe it was somewhere else, but someone said they had a vault, and they're like, you can bring in your own third-party auditor. That's what. And then, but instead we have Steve Mnuchin go there. He doesn't say the gold is there. He says gold is safe. And by all means, if anyone thinks I'm making this next part up, I can understand it. But you can Google it. It was in a Zero Hedge article, amongst other places. Mnuchin actually, who's a former movie guy, says gold is safe. And wouldn't it be a fantastic movie if we went there and the gold wasn't there? Excuse me? I mean,
I hadn't heard that.
I don't know if that's supposed to be funny, but given the financial condition the country's in, at the very least, highly inappropriate for someone in his position to make. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, what are you supposed to say when the group that would have been responsible, for example, for auditing how Donald Rumsfeld on September 10th, 2011, pulled his Ben Bernanke on Goldak, where he's like, oh, we lost $2.1 trillion. American bureaucracy is the real weapon against Americans. And it turns out the group that would have done that audit just so happened to be the section of the Pentagon that got blown up. I mean, it's like anyone that does their own independent research into any of these things, I mean, you know, it's hard to imagine the way certain things are really run. But yeah, and one other thing, if I could mention about September 11th, that not get as much attention as perhaps it should. I didn't even see this until maybe it was last year. Check out what the Federal Reserve did on September 11th. Similar to what they did with Corona this year, where I read a couple articles once about, I mean, basically, you know, if you wanted to launder cocaine and submit the receipt into the Fed's discount window, sure, pile it on. These bonds can't clear. Sure, we don't have records for Cantor Fitzgerald. So, I mean, that was, you know, and again, I think it comes down to, like we've discussed, you know, could these guys really be this disturbingly corrupt and manipulated? But again, with Joe Biden, you know, and I've thought a lot about what to say about this, but I guess, I don't know, since no one I'm surprised some Republican or Trump hasn't pointed out that you can go on YouTube and see videos of the man that some people say is supposed to be our next president fondling children while their parents are being this wasn't like some hidden camera. I mean, it's on C-SPAN while congressmen are being like, hey, here's Senator Joe from Kentucky is going to serve next. And Biden is fondling the children. And there's a hot mic picking up him saying things that I tweeted something about it one day, and because it was weird. Joe Biden runs commercials on my YouTube channel. I was thinking I wouldn't imagine there's a lot of people voting for him, and you know, some people who didn't like that comment. Although I'm wondering, are people aware of this? Is this going to go to an election where, again, the reason I hesitate to say anything, I really try and stay focused on the positives. I don't claim to be perfect by any means, so we all have things. But I mean, at some point, and I don't know exactly what Joe did or didn't do, but you can see part of it on camera. And then, you know, you look at some of this other stuff that comes out. I don't know the Podestas. If they hadn't been in the media, I wouldn't even know who they are. But when you see artwork of kids bound in gag in their underwear or cannibalism, I don't know what the explanation for that is. And, you know, and it's quite sad and quite unfortunate. I also think, from what I've learned of the metaphysics, if you go around saying, I hate this guy, I wish this guy would rot in a jail cell, I wish they would stop what they're doing. And I think part of the challenge is that when we respond with anger or negative energy, that, you know, maybe some people think I'm nuts, but I do believe that there are people that feed on that. And kind of in the way you see, I don't know, Democrats versus Republicans. I mean, George Bush, Obama, they both spent a lot of money they didn't have, started wars, did things that to me are horrific. But you get people, look at when Trump was elected. I used to go on Facebook more back then, but just seeing like people who, you know, a day earlier were friends, and they're, you know, whether one guy likes Trump or the other doesn't, and the hatred and vitriol that comes up. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of these things that are unfortunate, and RN sums it up well there. And however that sounds to other people, you know, I've seen the Wall Street thing, I've seen outside of it. And I know, at least in my own life, far more important than any data is just, you know, some of this stuff can get heavy, and there's days where it's a little hard to handle. Yet, to me, I think the biggest key, even more than gold, silver, or cryptos or anything like that, you know, the people who are here, you understand things that a lot of others don't, and handling that in a positive way, which can be a challenge at times. But when people wonder what can they do, no, I don't think this is something that can't end. I mean, it's series of horrific, unimaginable crimes, but I don't think you can put that tree back into an acorn and, just maybe one day it's supporting someone or just being kinder to each other. I mean, it's like there's enough stuff out there to deal with already, and I think there's a lot to be said just for treating people well and does more than we know.
Jean-Claude, can I say one thing quick?
Yes, go ahead, John.
Just to circle back for that person who asked about NESARA, because I do know I'm familiar with NESARA, and I just want to read this. So I just looked it up. So it was created by Harvey Francis Barnard in the 1990s, and what he wanted was a bimetallic currency standard, returning us to a bimetallic standard. So that'd be gold and silver. National sales tax instead of income tax. So I'm so for both of those things. But he also wanted to abolish compound interest on secured loans. And I just see that as being almost impossible given the banksters' control over humanity. Now, this system needs a reset, right? We're going into some other system, right? Now, if it's up to the IMF and the Bank for International Settlements and the international bankers and the Democrats get in control, they're probably going to get what they want, which is some sort of global currency eventually. It's not going to be a currency that sets we the people free. But what I think is interesting about this roundtable is Bix has always been about the good guys versus the bad guys. And this will unfold in a way that is positive for humanity and for we the people of the United States. And I hope that happens. I personally feel that the only way that's going to happen is if the Democrats, if Joe Biden doesn't become president, though, in November. If Joe Biden gets in, who do you think he serves? Yeah. We know who he serves, right? Same with Hillary Clinton. Same with, most of these Democrats. And it's funny to hear myself talking like this because, there was a period of time where I was completely shatter the right-left paradigm. We got to get beyond that. And I get it. I agree. But honestly, coming full circle with what I was saying earlier about Antifa and BLM rioting and the Democrats applauding that, Kamala Harris saying, hey, this is a movement. She told Stephen Colbert, this is a movement. This is great. We're going to continue to see these riots, and we should. She didn't say riots, but we're going to continue to see this unrest, and we should, even after November. So they're cheerleading this violence and this depravity. So I really think it's an existential threat, and I don't see things ending well for we the people if Joe Biden gets in there, given who he serves. So that's my comment on that. Maybe Bix wants to round out that NESARA.
I agree with you. Just hold on for a second here. Folks, we're about to round out the first portion of this episode here, so I'll give Bix the opportunity to answer about NESARA, and then I'll give Sean again the last word. And then, folks, if you want to be partaking in this roundtable where it's a no holds barred full communication, please join me on patreon.com/Beyond Mystic and look for that special insider access pass for the second portion of this show. And first of all, thank you very much for everyone who provided super chats for this episode. Thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. So Bix, back to you and NESARA, and then we'll close off this show with the last comments from Sean.
NESARA won't work. I've talked about it for a long time. Nor will GESARA, nor will the prosperity funds, nor will anything. The reality is, and this is what they write in the Fed documents, we need a creative destruction event that destroys everything because we've got money hidden away in little nooks and crannies all over the globe, quadrillions of dollars. We need to flush the old system in order to move forward. Right now, 99% of that money is held by a tiny, tiny percentage of the population. There will be no agreement on how this system goes forward. The question is not how can we change the system? It can be changed easily. No bailout. No, the next time the banks come, just say no bailout. And I think that is coming over the remainder of this year. So the question I had, that was up before, do you see something big coming in September, October, November? Absolutely. And that's the destruction of the old system. Now, what to go forward with? No, if you have NESARA, you'd have to reallocate money or the same form of money to humanity. You need a band of deciders, and those deciders will be like guys like Steve Mnuchin or Jamie Dimon. No, that's not going to work either. So we need to think about this a little different. We need to think about an organic collapse that nobody controls, which means not bailing out the banks again. And then when you start up again, the way Alan Greenspan had written it in the Federal Reserve documents is you start reallocating money according to Social Security balances in the United States. That way, the people have worked hard enough, the longest amount of time will get more money than someone who just started working. And it kind of, and when you think about Social Security, it's capped at like $110,000. They stop taking money out. So the big money is not going to get the vast majority of the money in this scenario because everybody will lose everything. And then it's about reallocation. And that's what Ruta was doing with the colored flowers. That's the analysis. Hey, there's Jenny. One thing Jenny was talking about, yeah, she gave me some timing on this cluster blank. But in the chat room, I was like looking over to the side and I was like, they were talking about that saying, money is the root of all evil. It's not, that's not the saying. The saying is the love of money is the root of all evil. It's the love of money is the problem. The money's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with the currency as long as it's sound and reliable and scarce and you can see it, which we can't with most of the money now. But yes, I think absolutely the Nestra Gestra, and I've seen 40 of them in my 20 years. So there's 2 or 3 every year. This is how we're going to reallocate money to humanity. This is how we're going to fix the problem. The problem is we can't even agree on what kind of toilet paper to put in Congress right now. How are they going to agree on anything about rearranging a monetary system when most of the people at the top will probably be in jail, the criminal bankster crowd, because people will be so angry that we are being asked to bail them out again with all their crimes. So no, I don't think Nestra, Gestra, any of those will work. It has to be more organic in my book.
Very good. Thank you, Bix. Sean, any last words before we leave the show? And also, please let people know how they can support you. I know that you've been demonetized also by YouTube, and it's making it harder and harder for people like you, like Bix, like Chris, like myself, to be out here and try to educate people. So please let us know how we can support you now. If you have any new projects coming out, are you printing up maybe a new silver coin for SGT Report? And also, please give us your last words for the show.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. So no, on the silver coin, we made 10,000 of those and they're sold out. So right now there's not another plan. I'd like to do another one. So we'll have to see, but people can check me out over on Patreon. I really appreciate the support. And I just launched SGTReport.tv, which is our own server. So in the event that YouTube does terminate my channels, Mel Fabregas at Veritas has been talking about another purge that's coming right before the election. If that happens, God forbid, I will be at SGTReport.tv exclusively and on Patreon. So I would ask people to follow me there. And I do put up exclusive content there that I do not put up on BitChute or YouTube. So I guess that's worth mentioning. And then for real news every day, I'm sort of an aggregator of content like Drudge Report. It's sgtreport.com, where you'll see stuff like this interview and real news of the day, the antidote to corporate propaganda and CNN Mockingbird mainstream media lies there at sgtreport.com. So thanks for having me on, Jean-Claude.
I really appreciate it. Like I said, I'm like a kid in a candy store having you all guys here, all of you gentlemen here. I really appreciate it. So Sean, thank you so much for being here. Of course, everyone, you can follow Sean at sgtreport.com. You can follow Bix at roadtoruta.com, and please subscribe to his private road where he does excellent work, especially lately with a bunch of psychics. And you're going to get a lot
not
more.
Before though.
The your stuff too, but they know that stuff. You've been at it for 20 years. This is the new stuff I'm interested in. So you're on my show. That's what I'm interested in. And of course, you can follow Chris at ArcadiaEconomics.com. And he, of course, has his new book. It's already now in paper format, The Big Silver Short. So I hope you can support him as well by buying that book or buying the audiobook. And so thank you, Chris, Bix, and Sean, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Guys on YouTube, if you're still here on the show right now and you want to have access to the second part of it, where we're going to have this no-holds-barred conversation with these 3 lovely gentlemen, please follow us on Beyond Mystic at patreon.com/Beyond Mystic and look for that special insider access pass. And I thank you, everyone, for all the super chats. Thank you so much for all the interaction, the questions, and the comments in the show. I love you all. Have a great day. Au revoir.
Au revoir.